Hey dudes, my name's Claire. I'm a 19-year-old film and graphic design student from Notre Dame. I am a competitive track and cross country runner. I'm a hobby gymnast, and I'm also super interested in true crime and criminal psychology. So welcome to the first episode of my new YouTube series, 15-Minute True Crime. So in this series, I'm going to be going over true crime cases in 15 to 20 minutes or less, so people can watch the videos quickly in one sitting, and I'm going to try to incorporate my background as a film and graphic design student to make the videos nice and pretty. So yeah, for the first episode of this series, I'm going to be talking about the Gypsy Rose Blanchard Munchausen by proxy case, which most true crime fans or nerds or whatever have probably heard of. It was like the feature point of the recent Hulu miniseries The Act, but this was the case that got me super interested in true crime, so I thought it would be the perfect first case for me to talk about in a video because I'm already pretty familiar with it. Let's go. On June 14th, 2015, police entered the Missouri home of Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard after concerned friends brought really disturbing Facebook posts to their attention. These posts, which were posted on Dee Dee's own Facebook page, read, "The bitch is dead," and "slashed that fat peg and her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so loud, LOL." The police found Dee Dee lying in a pool of her own blood face down on her bed, and by that point, they determined she'd been dead for around 5 days. But even more concerning, Dee Dee's profoundly disabled daughter, Gypsy Rose, was missing. And according to Dee Dee, Gypsy suffered from a myriad of ailments, including leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and pretty severe mental delays. The wheelchair and medications that Gypsy relied on to live were still in the house. So authorities and friends feared the worst. Gypsy could have been abducted, or worse, she could be dead without her vital medical equipment. I mean, after all, Gypsy couldn't have just gotten up and walked away. But let's start the case from the beginning. Dee Dee Blanchard was actually born Claudine Petrie in Louisiana in 1967 to her parents, Claude and Emma Petrie. Dee Dee had been a troubled child, though, and she had a pretty bad habit of shoplifting, and her family in later interviews with ABC actually described her as evil. So when Dee Dee was 24 years old, she became pregnant by her 17-year-old partner, Rod Blanchard, and in July 1991, their daughter Gypsy Rose was born. Gypsy's real birth date is not exactly known because, as I'll tell you guys later in this case, Dee Dee constantly fudged the paperwork to make Gypsy seem younger than she was, so Gypsy herself never actually really knew her own age. Around the same time that Gypsy was born, though, Dee Dee and Rod separated, so Dee Dee took Gypsy to live with her own family in Louisiana, and they were living with Dee Dee's mother, Emma, who it's actually believed that Dee Dee may have killed her own mother by denying her food. As soon as Gypsy was born, Dee Dee began to identify health conditions that she believed her young daughter was suffering from, and this all began when Gypsy was only a few months old. She was convinced that her young daughter had sleep apnea, so Dee Dee brought baby Gypsy into the hospital for repeated hospitalizations, and after a wide array of tests, though, it was determined that Gypsy did not suffer from sleep apnea. However, Dee Dee eventually obtained a sleep apnea monitor, which Gypsy would wear for a long time while she slept for many years later. As Gypsy grew older, her mother just continued to identify medical conditions that she believed her daughter to be suffering from. When Gypsy was 8 years old, Dee Dee brought her into the hospital after she fell off of her grandfather's motorcycle, and in reality, Gypsy had only suffered a minor scrape on her knee, but Dee Dee was convinced that this fall caused severe damage to Gypsy's knee and that she would need surgery if she ever wanted to be able to walk again. So in order to prevent what Dee Dee believed would be further damage to Gypsy's knee, Gypsy was wheelchair bound from that moment on. Dee Dee also had Gypsy tested for muscular dystrophy, and muscular dystrophy is a genetic disorder which causes muscle weakness and loss, causing many of the sufferers to eventually become wheelchair bound. So just as the sleep apnea test came back negative, though, this test came back negative as well. But Dee Dee was not convinced that Gypsy didn't suffer from muscular dystrophy, so she again insisted that this negative test was in fact inaccurate. So Gypsy remained wheelchair-bound, and her mother continued to claim for the rest of Dee Dee's life, at least, that Gypsy suffered muscular dystrophy. When Gypsy was in the 2nd grade, Dee Dee pulled her out of public school in favor of homeschooling because, as Dee Dee claimed, Gypsy had too many medical issues to be in the regular public school system. However, most sources say there was very little actual schooling going on with the homeschooling, and both Inside Edition and Rolling Stone claim that Gypsy actually taught herself to read by reading the Harry Potter book series. Around the same time, Dee Dee and Gypsy moved out of Dee Dee's family home into public housing in the New Orleans area, and they were also able to receive a lot of welfare benefits because of Gypsy's supposed disabilities. The long list of disabilities and ailments that Gypsy supposedly suffered from only grew while the Blanchards were living in the New Orleans area. Dee Dee brought Gypsy to the hospital, claiming that her daughter suffered from recurring seizures. So Gypsy was placed on anti-seizure medication, and this anti-seizure medication has some really intense side effects, and it caused all of Gypsy's teeth to fall out. So Dee Dee said that this was because Gypsy was allergic to sugar. So a feeding tube was placed in Gypsy, and throughout her life she would eat through a feeding tube a lot of the time. In the summer of 2005, Hurricane Katrina ravaged the New Orleans area, as a lot of people know, and the hurricane killed many people and destroyed thousands of homes and businesses, including Gypsy and Dee Dee's home. Dee Dee would later claim that Gypsy's medical records and birth certificate had also been destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. However, after Dee Dee died, this was found to be untrue, but this made it a lot easier for Dee Dee to falsify Gypsy's diagnoses and eventually falsify her age throughout her life. After Hurricane Katrina, they moved to Missouri, where they became essentially local celebrities. By this time, Dee Dee had also convinced the community that Gypsy was suffering from leukemia, which again she wasn't, and Dee Dee would maintain this appearance by regularly shaving Gypsy's head, and she would just tell her daughter that, oh, I'm shaving your head because your hair is eventually going to fall out anyway. The community was so heartbroken for this very sick little girl that they gifted the Blanchards multiple free trips and hotel stays, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation actually gave Gypsy and Dee Dee backstage passes to a Miranda Lambert concert. And then in 2008, the Blanchards would move into the home where Dee Dee's body was ultimately found. This Springfield, Missouri home was a custom home gifted to the family from the Habitat for Humanity, and it was complete with a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub to accommodate for Gypsy's disabilities. However, as Gypsy entered into her teens and 20s, Dee Dee's facade just began to completely unravel. During Gypsy's life, Dee Dee obtained at least one forged birth certificate, and this birth certificate claimed that Gypsy was born in 1995, making her 4 years younger than she actually was, and when it was obtained, it essentially made her into a teenager when she was already an adult. In 2011, when Gypsy was about 18 or 19, she discovered paperwork that contradicted her believed age of about 14 or 15 years old. And in her own words, this is what Gypsy said in an interview with Dr. Phil about this moment.
Pretty soon, I found a couple of bits of paper in my mom's safe, things that stated that I was born in 1991, made me question my real age. I asked her about it. She said that it was a typo. I had taken those papers and the Medicaid card that I found with my actual real birthday on it, and I ran away from home.
As a young adult, Gypsy enjoyed attending science fiction and fantasy conventions with her mother. As a 19-year-old, Gypsy met a 35-year-old man at one of these conventions, and she ran away into a hotel room with him. However, Gypsy's escape attempt definitely did not last long, as the overly controlling Dee Dee quickly retrieved Gypsy, and she berated the man for taking advantage of a profoundly disabled minor. And according to later interviews with Gypsy, she was intensely punished for this escape attempt. She says that when she returned home from the hotel, her mother smashed her laptop with a hammer to further restrict Gypsy's communication with the outside world, and she also chained Gypsy to her bed for at least 2 weeks, according to court testimony from Gypsy after her mother died. As Gypsy entered into her 20s, she would use the internet while her mom was sleeping late at night, and in 2012, Gypsy met Nicholas Godejohn on a Christian dating website. Nick is about 2 years older than Gypsy's true age, and he lived with his parents in Big Bend, Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is my home state, and as I've become interested in true crime, I've seen a lot of crazy things have happened in Wisconsin, from this, Ed Gein, Jeffrey Dahmer. It's pretty insane. But Nick had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, and he was also speculated to maybe have some personality disorders as well. He also had a criminal record for indecent exposure. Gypsy and Nick quickly developed a sexual relationship that centered around some pretty disturbing role play as well as BDSM. And I'm not kink shaming here. I'm not saying the BDSM is disturbing. I'm saying some of the role plays which they did were. According to a neighbor friend of Gypsy's, Gypsy and Nick eventually discussed the possibility of marriage, and they brainstormed names for their future children. So with Nick's pretty severe mental health issues and Gypsy's life of extreme isolation, this just bred a relationship that was pretty unhealthy, strange, and dependent. About 1 year into their online relationship, Gypsy really wanted to introduce Nick to her mother Dee Dee because she really wanted to stop hiding the relationship. The couple planned to meet at a movie theater where they would pretend that they were meeting each other for the first time, and there Gypsy planned to introduce Dee Dee to Nick, hoping that her mom would accept her new friend. However, this meeting did not really go as planned, and Dee Dee did not like Nick at all. During the movie, Gypsy was able to sneak into the bathroom where she lost her virginity to Nick. After this real-life meeting, this only catalyzed Gypsy and Nick's relationship. Gypsy realized that she and Nick would never be able to have their happily ever after as long as Gypsy's mother remained in the picture, because she was under such intense control from Dee Dee. According to a Harper's Bazaar article, the meeting at the movie theater was the day that Gypsy decided that Dee Dee had to die. As people who know this case already know, Gypsy asked Nick for help in killing her mother. And unfortunately, Nick's mental illnesses impaired his empathy and his decision-making skills so much that he agreed. In June 2015, Nick Godejohn arrived by bus in Springfield, Missouri, where he checked into a motel and awaited a text from Gypsy that would tell him once Dee Dee was asleep. When Nick arrived at the Blanchard's house, Gypsy let him inside, and she gave him duct tape, gloves, and a knife. And she then hid in the bathroom and covered her ears because she didn't want to hear the screams of her mother being murdered. She was ultimately conflicted, and she'd not expected Nick to actually go through with this plan. Nick entered Dee Dee's bathroom, and he stabbed her multiple times in the back while she slept. After that, Gypsy, who had been able to walk the whole time, she walked effortlessly out of her home, and she and Nick fled to another motel, and they stole $4,000 from Dee Dee. The pair mailed the murder weapon back to Nick's home in Wisconsin, where they soon arrived to stay with Nick's family. By now, community members were aware of Dee Dee's murder and of Gypsy's disappearance, and the police traced the IP address of the Facebook post that I mentioned earlier in the video to Nick's home in Wisconsin. So on June 15th, 2015, the Waukesha County Police raided the Godejohn home where Gypsy and Nick were taken into custody for charges of murder and felony armed criminal action. The pair was extradited back to Missouri, where the community was stunned to learn that Gypsy had been able to walk this entire time. Upon learning of Gypsy's life story, psychiatrists concluded that Dee Dee Blanchard suffered from Munchausen by proxy syndrome, which is a medical condition where the sufferer falsifies or exaggerates the illnesses or disabilities of someone in their care, usually a kid or an elderly person, in order to garner sympathy and favors and support from doctors as well as community members. It was deemed that Gypsy had suffered for her entire life under Dee Dee's abuse, which led to sympathy from many who believed that this should result in a lighter sentence for Gypsy, who, although she orchestrated her mother's murder, she'd also been completely controlled her entire life. Her age had been falsified, she'd been pulled out of school, and most of all, she'd been forced to take medications and sit in a wheelchair and in some cases undergo surgeries, all of which were unnecessary because she was completely healthy the whole time. Ultimately, Gypsy was sentenced to 10 years in prison in July of 2016 for second-degree murder. Meanwhile, in November 2018, Nick Godejohn was found guilty of first-degree murder after a 4-day trial. And in February 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison for murder with a concurrent 25-year sentence for armed criminal action. Since the trial, Gypsy and Nick have no longer been in contact, and Gypsy has been interviewed multiple times from prison. Most strikingly to me, in a 2018 interview with 2020, Gypsy said, "I feel like I'm freer in prison than living with my mom, because now I'm just allowed to live like a normal woman." Since the trial, this case has become incredibly well known, especially in true crime circles, and even outside of it, just because of the sheer, strangeness and interestingness of this case. It's just not something people hear every day. It's not your typical murder case. So one super interesting resource on this case is the 2017 HBO documentary, Mommy, Dad, and Dearest, and it's directed by Aaron Lee Carr. And this documentary uses a lot of home videos and news footage, and it shows Gypsy throughout her life, which is really interesting and also disturbing. There's also extensive interviews with Gypsy and Dee Dee's family, and this is where I got a lot of the information about Dee Dee's family and their attitudes and opinions about her. So another resource which I think is really great is the Hulu miniseries The Act. And disclaimer up front, this miniseries is obviously for entertainment purposes and not everything in it is factual, but I think this miniseries is super well made and it really puts you into the shoes of all the characters in this case. It's just so disturbing, entertaining. I really recommend it for people who want to get a better sense of this case. So yeah, that's all I have to say on this case. Obviously, it's really tragic that she felt so trapped with her abusive mother that she felt the need to murder her. I think you can see a lot of different perspectives in this case. No one's quite the good guy, but a lot of tragic things went down. I had a lot of fun or enjoyment researching this and making my first true crime video, and I'm really excited to edit this, make it all pretty, and put it out for you guys. I hope some people watch this. And after this, I'm hoping to make more true crime videos, continue this series, 15-minute true crime. Thank you so much for watching my first video. I really, really appreciate it. Subscribe if you would like more true crime videos and videos of all sorts, in fact. Make sure to like this video and share it around. I really appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. Bye.